Forest mysteries. The cold lived in Cole's bones now. Not the sharp bite of a winter morning, but something deeper, older. It settled in his knuckles, made them ache when he pulled his mittens off to check the pan of a trap. His fingers were thick and crooked, the nails yellowed, the skin cracked in 100 places where frost had kissed him over 50 winters and never let go. He knelt in the snow, breath pluming from his mouth, and stared at the lynx. It was dead, of course. The trap had done its work clean. One paw caught in the jaws, the animal frozen stiff now, fur still thick and gray and perfect. Cole ran his hand over the pelt, feeling the density of it, the weight. Good fur, the kind that brought top dollar at the trading post. He should have felt satisfied. Instead, something cold and unfamiliar twisted in his gut. The village of Paxson Bay sat 30 miles behind him, a scatter of log cabins and prefab houses huddled against the edge of the forest. He'd left before dawn. Snow machine parked a mile back where the trail ran out. The rest he did on foot, the way his father had taught him. Snowshoes whispering across the crust, the silence so heavy it pressed against his ears. He'd run this trap line for 43 years. Knew every spruce, every frozen creek, every hollow where a fox might den or a marten might pass. The knowledge was carved into him, as familiar as the layout of his own cabin. But something was different now, something he couldn't name. Cole set the lynx aside and reset the trap. His hands moved by instinct, baiting the pan with a piece of rabbit gut, checking the mechanism, sprinkling snow over the fresh metal to hide the scent. The cold bit at his bare fingers until they burned, then went numb. He pulled his mittens back on, flexing his hands to bring the blood back. He remembered the wolf. The thought came from nowhere, and he almost cursed aloud. It was an old memory, one he'd buried deep. The gray wolf from 6 years ago, the biggest he'd ever seen. He'd caught it in a leg hold, the same kind he used now. The animal had fought until its paw was nearly torn off. Cole had found it at dawn, exhausted, its yellow eyes watching him with something that wasn't fear, something like understanding. He'd shot it. That was the job. You didn't let a wolf go. They were killers. They took calves, dogs, ate into a man's livelihood. His father had taught him that too. But the eyes. He'd never forgotten the eyes. Cole stood, his knees popping, and looked out across the river. The Tanaqua was frozen solid now, or should have been. The ice was thick enough to hold a truck in January. But this was March, and March was a liar. The snow looked firm, the ice looked solid, but underneath the river ran faster, warmer, eating away at the surface from below. He knew this. He knew the signs, the dull color, the faint sheen of wetness where no water should be. He walked toward the river anyway. The marten trap was set on the far bank, near an old deadfall where he'd seen tracks 3 days before. The direct route was across the ice, a shortcut that saved an hour of going around by the ridge. He'd crossed here a dozen times this winter, a dozen times without trouble. He was halfway across when he heard it. A sound like a branch snapping, but deeper. A sound that went through his boots and up his legs and settled in his chest. The ice cracked. Cole stopped breathing. He stood perfectly still, as if the ice was a thing that could be fooled by stillness. His heart hammered against his ribs. His eyes dropped to the surface beneath his feet. A dark line had appeared, thin as a hair, running from his left boot toward the far shore. He took one slow step backward. The ice gave way. There was no warning, no gradual sinking. One moment he was standing, the next the world fell out from under him. The cold hit, like a physical blow, drove the air from his lungs. Water closed over his head, black and absolute. He surfaced, gasping, his arms flailing for the edge. His mittened hands found nothing but slush. The ice broke every time he tried to pull himself up. The cold was already stealing his strength, turning his limbs to lead. His clothes, his boots, the weight of them dragging him down. He heard himself make a sound, a low, animal cry that didn't sound like a man at all. His mind went clear for a moment, the way it did when death was close. He thought of the lynx, frozen on the bank. He thought of his cabin, the wood stove cold, his rifle in the corner. He thought of nothing because there was nothing left. His hands slipped. The water pulled him under. And in the darkness, before the cold erased everything, he saw them. Yellow eyes, watching him from across a fire that didn't exist yet. Then there was nothing. The first thing was the smell. Smoke and wet fur and something else, something raw, an animal that his brain could not name. Then came the pain. It started in his fingers and toes, a deep burning that spread inward like fire, soaking into dry wood. Cole tried to move, and his body refused, every muscle locked, every joint screaming. He opened his eyes. The world was gray. Gray rock above him, gray light filtering in from somewhere to his left, gray smoke curling up toward a crack in the ceiling. He was lying on something soft, something that smelled like pine and earth. Spruce boughs. Someone had laid him on a bed of spruce boughs. The fire was small, no bigger than a man's chest, built in a shallow depression in the cave floor. The heat reached his face, but not his feet, and his feet were the worst. He tried to lift his head, and the cave tilted, spun, settled back into place. He was not dead. The realization came slowly, pulling itself out of the fog in his skull. He was not dead. Someone had pulled him from the river. Someone had brought him here, built this fire, covered him with. Cole's eyes found the pelt. It was spread over his chest and legs, heavy and thick, the fur a deep gray that lightened to silver at the edges. Wolf fur. He knew wolf fur. Had handled 100 pelts just like it. But this one was different. This one still had the warmth of the living animal in it, the oils still fresh, the hide not yet cured. His hand moved without his permission, reaching up to touch the fur. His fingers were swollen, the skin purple and white, and they left dark prints on the gray. He could not feel the texture, could not feel anything but the burning. The fire crackled. Something shifted in the darkness beyond the firelight. Cole's hand froze. The wolf was watching him from the far side of the cave. It lay on its side, its ribs rising and falling in a slow, labored rhythm. The firelight caught its eyes, and they were yellow. Yellow like old bone, like autumn leaves, like the eyes of a wolf he had shot 6 years ago on a frozen riverbank a mile from this very cave. Its front leg was twisted beneath it, the paw bent at an angle that made Cole's stomach turn. The leg did not move when the wolf breathed. It lay there like a dead thing attached to a living body. Cole knew that leg. He knew the trap that had done it, the number 3 victor with the offset jaws that he had set in a game trail, because wolves were killers, because they took calves and dogs, because a man had to protect what was his. He had checked that trap on a morning just like this one, had found the wolf waiting for him, exhausted and bloody, its leg nearly torn through. He had raised his rifle. The wolf had looked at him, and Cole had pulled the trigger. Or he had meant to. The memory was clouded now, confused with other memories, other wolves, other shots. But he remembered the eyes. He had dreamed about the eyes for a year afterward, and then less often, and then not at all, until he fell through the ice and saw them again in the darkness. The wolf was not dead. It was here. It was here, and Cole was alive, and the fire was burning, and the pelt spread over him was still warm with the animal's own heat. He understood then. Not all of it, not the how or the why, but enough. The wolf had pulled him from the river. The wolf had dragged him to this cave. The wolf had lain beside him, had covered him with its own body to keep him from freezing, and now it lay across the fire, too weak to stand, watching him with those yellow eyes. His hand was still on the pelt. He pulled it away, slowly, and his fingers found the knife on his belt. The leather sheath was frozen stiff, but the handle was there, solid and familiar. He had carried that knife for 30 years, had used it to skin 1,000 animals. The wolf's eyes did not leave his face. It did not growl. It did not bare its teeth. It lay there, its breath shallow, its leg twisted beneath it, and watched him with something that was not fear and was not hope and was not anything Cole had a name for. His fingers closed around the knife handle. The fire popped. An ember rose toward the ceiling, flickered, went dark. Cole thought about the lynx he had left on the riverbank, frozen in the trap. He thought about the marten and the fox and the beaver and the wolf he had shot 6 years ago, and the wolf before that, and the wolf before that, going back to the first wolf he had killed when he was 15 years old and his father had stood behind him and said, "That's how it's done. That's what a man does." The wolf's leg was twisted. The wolf could not run. The wolf had saved his life, and it lay there helpless, and Cole had his hand on his knife. He pulled his hand away from the blade. It was not a decision. It was something deeper than decision, something that came from a place he had forgotten existed. He let go of the knife, and the knife stayed in its sheath, and he lay back on the spruce boughs and stared at the ceiling of the cave. The wolf made a sound, not a growl, not a whimper, something softer, something that might have been a sigh. Cole closed his eyes. When he opened them again, the wolf was still watching. The fire had burned down to embers. Outside the cave, the wind had begun to blow, and the snow was falling, and the world had narrowed to this small space, this fire, this animal, this man. He did not move toward the knife again. The second day came without light. There was no sun in the gorge where the wolf had made its den, only a slow brightening of the gray that seeped through the cave mouth and turned the walls from black to charcoal. Cole had not slept, not truly. He had drifted in and out of a state that was not quite waking and not quite dreaming, always aware of the weight of the fur on his chest, the ache in his fingers, the presence of the animal on the other side of the dead fire. The wolf had not moved either. He could hear its breathing, shallow but steady, and every time he opened his eyes, he saw its shape in the darkness, the slow rise and fall of its ribs, the gleam of its eyes when the light caught them just right. His hands were worse now. He had pulled off his mitten sometime in the night. He did not remember when, and now his fingers lay in his lap like things that belonged to someone else. They were swollen to twice their normal size, the skin waxy and pale, and the tips had gone from white to blue to a color he did not have a name for. He tried to flex them, and they would not move. The burning had stopped. That was the worst part. When the burning stopped, it meant the nerves were dead. He thought about his cabin. He thought about the wood stove, the can of coffee on the shelf, the wool socks drying by the fire. He thought about these things the way a drowning man thinks about air, with a longing so sharp it was almost physical. The wolf made a sound, not a growl, not a whimper, a small sound, almost like a question. Cole looked across the dead fire. The wolf had lifted its head, just slightly, and was watching him with those yellow eyes. Its leg lay twisted beneath it, the same leg, the one he had caught 6 years ago. The paw was swollen now, the skin stretched tight over the bones, and he could see where the old injury had never healed right. The wolf had been living with that pain for 6 years, had been hunting with it, running with it, surviving with it. "You should have let me drown," Cole said. His voice was a stranger's voice, cracked and raw, barely louder than the wind outside. He had not spoken in more than a day, had not wanted to speak, but the words came out anyway, pulled from somewhere he could not name. The wolf did not react. It simply watched. Cole shifted on the spruce boughs, trying to find a position that did not send pain shooting up his arms. The movement made his head swim, made the walls of the cave tilt and settle. He was weak. He knew he was weak, knew that if he did not find food soon, did not find warmth soon, he would not leave this cave. The wolf might leave. The wolf might survive, but Cole would not. I set that trap, he said, 6 years ago, on the ridge above the beaver pond. You were the biggest wolf I ever saw. I don't know what I thought, that you were a threat, that you'd take calves, take dogs, take anything you wanted. That's what my father always said. A wolf doesn't know its place. A wolf will take and take until you stop it. His voice cracked. He stopped, waited for the dizziness to pass, and when it did, he found that he was still talking. I checked the line every morning for 3 weeks. And then one morning you were there. You'd been there all night. I could see where you'd circled, where you'd tried to pull free. The ground was torn up, blood everywhere. And he stopped again. His throat had closed up, and he could not say the rest. Could not say that the wolf had looked at him without fear, without hatred, with something that had followed him into his dreams for a year, and then into silence for 5 more years until the ice broke and he saw those eyes again and knew he had never stopped seeing them at all. He looked down at his hands, at the fingers that would not move. I raised my rifle, he whispered. I was going to shoot you. I had the shot. I had it, and I don't remember pulling the trigger. I remember the sound. I remember you went down. And I walked away. I walked away, and I told myself it was done, that you were dead, that it was mercy. The wolf had not moved. Its eyes were still on his face, and in the gray light of the cave, he could see something in them that was not the empty animal blankness he had expected. There was a weight there, a presence, a thing that had been watching him for 6 years, waiting for this moment. You weren't dead, Cole said. I didn't check. I didn't go back to skin you. I just walked away and told myself you were dead because I couldn't. He could not finish the sentence. He could not say the truth of it, that he had not checked because he had been afraid of what he would find. Afraid that the wolf would be alive, still suffering, still watching. Afraid that he would have to raise the rifle again. The fire was dead. The cold was creeping back into the cave, settling into his chest, his legs, the ruined hands in his lap. He needed to move. He needed to find wood, rebuild the fire, do something, but his body would not obey. And some deeper part of him did not want it to. Some deeper part of him wanted to lie here in the dark and let the cold finish what the river had started. The wolf moved. It was a small movement, a shift of weight, and Cole heard the pain in it, the sharp intake of breath, the whine that the wolf tried to swallow. But it moved. It turned its body, just enough, so that its muzzle pointed toward him across the dead fire. Its nostrils flared, testing the air, and then it let its head sink back down onto the stone floor. Cole stared at the mangled leg, the swollen paw, the ribs showing through the gray fur. The wolf had saved his life. The wolf had dragged him from the river, had covered him with its own body to keep him warm, had given him the fur from its own back while it lay on the cold stone. And he had sat in this cave for a day and a night, thinking about his cabin, his coffee, his socks, and not once had he thought about the wolf's hunger or its pain or the leg that had been broken for 6 years because of him. He reached out with his ruined hands and gathered the fur that covered him. It was stiff now, the warmth gone from it, but it was still thick, still heavy. He pushed it toward the wolf, sliding it across the stone floor until it lay against the animal's side. The wolf did not move, but Cole thought he saw the yellow eyes soften, just for a moment before they closed. The third morning was clear. Cole woke to a blade of sunlight cutting across the cave floor, so bright it made his eyes water. The wolf was gone. The fur that had covered him was gone too, and for a moment he lay there, trying to remember where he was, why the air smelled of stone and smoke instead of wood and coffee. Then the pain came back, rolling over him in waves, and he remembered everything. He sat up slowly, using the cave wall to brace himself. His hands were useless. He had known they would be, had seen the color of them in the gray light of the cave, but seeing them in the morning sun was different. The fingers were black now, the tips shriveled, the skin cracked in places where fluid had seeped out during the night and frozen. He could not feel them, could not feel anything from the knuckles down. He looked at them and thought, calmly, that he would lose them. Maybe all of them, maybe more. The wolf had left meat. It was a piece of something, rabbit or ptarmigan, laid on a flat stone near the cave mouth. The meat was frozen solid, torn roughly, and there were tracks in the snow outside where the wolf had come and gone. Cole stared at the meat for a long time. The wolf had hunted. The wolf had brought food. The wolf, with its leg twisted and its paw swollen, had gone out into the cold and killed something and brought it back and left it where Cole could reach it. He crawled to the cave mouth. His legs worked, barely, and his arms worked, but every movement sent pain through his chest, his shoulders, the ruined things at the ends of his wrists. He picked up the meat with both hands, cradling it against his chest, and brought it back to the fire pit. There was no fire. He had no way to make a fire. His lighter was somewhere at the bottom of the river, and his hands would not hold a match even if he had one. He ate the meat frozen. It tasted like blood and nothing else, and it took him an hour to chew through it, working it with his back teeth because his front teeth were too sensitive to the cold. By the time he finished, the sun had moved across the cave floor and the shadows had begun to lengthen. He knew he could not stay. Another night in the cave without fire would kill him. The wolf could survive the cold, could curl into itself, and let its fur do the work. But Cole was not a wolf. Cole was a man with dead fingers and wet clothes and no shelter. He had to move. He had to reach the village. He crawled out of the cave into the snow. The light blinded him, white and endless, and he lay there for a moment with his face pressed into the cold until his eyes adjusted. The forest was still. No wind, no birds, no sound at all except his own breathing and the slow drip of meltwater somewhere out of sight. Spring was coming. Spring was coming, and he was going to die 3 miles from his cabin because he could not stand up. He stood up. It took 3 tries, and on the second try he fell against a tree and stayed there for a long time, but he stood up. His legs shook. His arms hung at his sides, the dead fingers brushing against his thighs like pieces of wood. He turned his face toward the village and started walking. The first mile took him 4 hours. He knew the ground, knew every ridge and hollow, but the snow was deep and his balance was gone, and every step was a negotiation with gravity. He fell more times than he could count. Each time he lay in the snow for a while, resting, letting the cold seep into him, and each time he found a reason to get up. The wolf, the cabin, the wood stove, the coffee on the shelf. He thought about the lynx he had left on the riverbank. It would be gone now, scavenged or buried under new snow. He thought about the trap line, the 30 miles of it, the 100 traps he had set and checked and reset for 43 years. He thought about his father, who had taught him to set a trap before he taught him to read, who had told him that a man's worth was measured in the pelts he brought home and the food he put on the table. The second mile was easier. Not easier in any real sense, but the rhythm of it came back to him, the way his body knew how to move through snow even when his mind was half gone. He followed the ridge above the river, away from the ice, and after a while he found the tracks of a snow machine. The machine itself was gone. Someone had come for it, probably Lars, probably the day after he disappeared, but the tracks were frozen in the snow, and he followed them like a road. He saw the village from the ridge. 20 cabins, a store, a church with a tin roof that flashed in the late sun. Smoke rising from chimneys. The sound of a dog barking somewhere, faint and distant. He stood there for a long time, looking down at the place he had lived for 67 years, and it looked different to him now. Smaller, colder, not the place he had left 3 days ago. Lars found him at the edge of town. Cole had fallen again, had crawled the last 100 yards on his knees, and he was sitting in the snow with his back against a fence post when the truck pulled up. Lars got out slow, his boots crunching, his face unreadable. He stood over Cole for a minute, looking at the black fingers, the frostbite on his cheeks, the clothes that were still damp from the river. "We thought you were dead," Lars said. Cole looked up at him. He thought about telling the story. The ice, the river, the wolf. He thought about explaining what had happened in the cave, the truce, the meat left on the stone. He thought about all of it, and then he did not think about it all. "I need to go home," he said. Lars helped him up. He did not ask questions, did not push, just put Cole's arm over his shoulder and walk him down the main street toward the cabin. People came to their doors, watched them pass, said nothing. Cole smelled wood smoke and frying bacon and the sharp chemical smell of the tannery behind the store. He smelled these things, and they smelled like strangers to him now. At the cabin door, Lars stopped. "What happened out there?" Cole turned. His hand was on the door latch, the dead fingers wrapped around the cold metal, and he looked past Lars at the town, the smoke, the traps hanging on the wall of the shed across the road. "No more traps," he said. He went inside and closed the door. The doctor came from 200 miles away, a small plane on floats that landed in the river before the ice was fully out. His name was Benning, and he had the thin hands and tired eyes of a man who had seen too much frostbite in too many villages. He looked at Cole's fingers, touched them with instruments that felt like ice themselves, and then he sat back and told Cole what Cole already knew. The fingers were gone. The first knuckles on both hands, the second on the left. He would need a surgeon in Anchorage, and he would need to go soon before the infection spread up into the palms. Cole told him no. Benning argued. Cole told him no again, and there was something in his voice that made Benning stop arguing. The doctor left antibiotics and painkillers and a roll of clean bandages, and then he got back in his plane and flew away, and Cole sat in his cabin with his hands wrapped in white and watched the river melt. The traps were still in the shed. He could see the shed from his window, a low building of rough boards and a tin roof, and he knew exactly what was inside. The number 3 Victors, the number 1.5s for Martin, the Connebeers for Beaver. 57 traps in total, some of them his father's, some his grandfather's, some he had bought himself over the years. They were good steel, well cared for, worth more than everything else he owned put together. On the 3rd day after the doctor left, Cole put on his coat and walked to the shed. His hands were wrapped in bandages, and he could not open the door properly, had to hook his wrist over the latch and pull. The smell inside was oil and rust and old fur, a smell he had known since he was a boy. The traps hung on nails along the walls, neat rows of them, each one cleaned and waxed and ready for the next season. He took them down one by one. It was slow work, clumsy work, using the heels of his hands and the stumps of his fingers to lift each trap from its nail. He piled them in the center of the floor, and when they were all down, he stood there looking at them, at the pile of steel that represented 50 years of his life, and he felt nothing. No anger, no sadness, no hatred, just a quiet certainty that they did not belong to him anymore. He carried them out to the edge of the forest. 7 trips, each one harder than the last, his arms shaking under the weight, his bandages soaked through with sweat and blood by the time he was done. He piled the traps at the base of an old spruce, the same tree his father had used as a landmark for the first trap line, and then he walked back to the village. People were watching. He had known they would be. News traveled fast in Paxson Bay, faster than the doctor's plane, faster than the spring melt. Everyone knew about his hands. Everyone knew about the traps. He had seen the looks, the whispered conversations that stopped when he walked past, the way the door of the store closed a little faster when he approached. He went to the store anyway. He needed food, and there was no other place to get it. The store was small, shelves half empty, the smell of coffee and kerosene and the sweet rot of vegetables that had been in the cooler too long. Mabel was behind the counter, her face pinched, and Lars was there too, standing by the wood stove with a cup of coffee in his hand. Cole took what he needed: rice, beans, salt, coffee. He put them on the counter, and Mabel rang them up without looking at him, and then Lars spoke. "Heard you dumped your traps." Cole did not answer. He was trying to get his wallet out of his pocket, his bandaged hands fumbling at the zipper, and he did not have the attention to spare for Lars. "I asked you a question," Lars said. There was an edge in his voice now, something sharp and hard. "Heard you dumped your traps out by the old spruce. 50 years of good steel, just thrown away like garbage." Cole got the wallet out. He laid it on the counter, opened it with his teeth, and counted out the bills with the heels of his hands. Mabel took the money without speaking. "You hear me?" Lars stepped closer. He was a big man, younger than Cole by 20 years, with thick shoulders and a face that had gone red from too much whiskey and too many winters. "You think you could just walk away from this? From all of us? From what your father built?" Cole picked up his bag of food. He turned to face Lars, and for a moment neither of them spoke. Cole looked at the man, at the anger in his face, at the coffee cup in his hand, and he thought about the wolf in the cave, the yellow eyes watching him across the fire. "My father was wrong," Cole said. The words came out quiet, almost gentle, and they landed in the small store like stones dropped into still water. Lars's face went from red to purple. Mabel made a small sound, something between a gasp and a sigh. The man by the door, who had been pretending to look at fishing lures, turned to stare. "Your father was the best trapper on this river," Lars said. His voice was low now, dangerous. "He taught you everything you know. He taught all of us. And you stand there with your ruined hands and tell me he was wrong." Cole shifted the bag in his arms. The bandages had started to bleed through again, dark spots spreading across the white, and the pain was a constant thing now, a fire that never went out. "He taught me to kill," Cole said. "That's all he taught me. That's all any of us learned. And I spent 50 years doing it, and I have nothing to show for it but these." He held up his hands, the bandaged stumps, the missing fingers. "And a debt I can never repay." Lars stared at him. The anger was still there, but something else had joined it, something that looked almost like fear. "You lost your mind out there," he said. "That's what happened. You fell through the ice, and your mind went with it. You don't know what you're saying." Cole did not answer. He turned and walked out of the store, the bell on the door ringing behind him, and he did not look back. The bag of food was heavy in his arms, heavier than it should have been, and by the time he reached his cabin, his hands were bleeding freely, soaking through the bandages and dripping onto the snow. He went inside. He put the food on the counter. He sat down in a chair by the cold stove, and he looked at his hands, at the blood and the bandages and the missing fingers, and he knew that Lars was wrong. He had never been more right in his life. The rock came through the window after dark. Cole was sitting in the dark, had been sitting in the dark for hours, and the sound of breaking glass was so sudden and so loud that he did not move for a long moment. He sat there in his chair, the cold wind blowing through the broken pane, and listened to the sound of footsteps running away down the path. He did not go to the window. He did not look outside. He sat in the dark with his ruined hands in his lap and thought about the wolf, somewhere out there in the forest, and he wondered if it was watching the village tonight, watching the lights go out one by one, watching the man who had saved it sit alone in the dark with a rock on his floor and glass in his hair. He did not cry. He had not cried since he was a boy, and he did not cry now. But he sat there until the wind died and the cold settled into his bones, and he did not move to cover the window or light the stove or do any of the things a man was supposed to do. He just sat and waited and thought about yellow eyes in the darkness. The weeks that followed were the longest of Cole's life. Spring came slowly to Paxson Bay, the snow melting in a slush that froze again each night, the river cracking and groaning as the ice broke up in fits and starts. Cole did not leave his cabin much. There was no reason to leave. The store was closed to him now. Not officially, but Mabel's face when he walked through the door made it clear enough. He had enough rice and beans to last another week, maybe two, and after that he would have to figure something else out. His hands were healing. The doctor had been right about the infection, and for a while Cole had been sure he would lose more than the fingers. But the antibiotics did their work, and the flesh stopped turning black, and eventually the wounds closed over into thick pink scars that covered the stumps of his first knuckles. He could not grip anything, could not hold a spoon properly, could not button his coat, could not light the stove without using both hands and his teeth. But he was alive, and that was more than he had expected. The wolf came to the edge of the forest most evenings. Cole had started watching for it after the rock came through his window, had found himself looking toward the tree line as the light faded, waiting for the gray shape to appear. It was always there, just at the edge of visibility, sometimes standing, sometimes lying down with its head on its paws. Cole did not know if it was watching him or watching the village or just resting in the last light of the day. But it was there, and that was enough. Lars had started the rumors. Cole heard them from the few people who still spoke to him, the old women who lived at the far end of the village and had never liked Lars anyway. He had gone crazy out there, they said, spent too long in the cold. The wolf had gotten into his head, or maybe it was the other way around. He was keeping it now, they said, feeding it, letting it get used to people so it would come into the village and take the children. The children part was new. Cole had heard that one from Hannah, who lived 3 cabins down and had brought him a loaf of bread one afternoon when she thought no one was watching. She had stood on his porch with her eyes down, pushing the bread into his bandaged hands. And she had told him that Lars was saying the wolf would come for the kids, that Cole was responsible, that someone needed to do something before it was too late. He's afraid, Cole had said, and Hannah had looked up at him with something that might have been pity or might have been fear. He's not the only one, she had said, and then she had walked away quickly, and Cole had stood on his porch with the bread in his hands and watched her go. The shortages started after that. Cole had expected them. He had known, even when he dumped the traps, that the village would find a way to cut him off. The store was the only source of food within 100 miles, and Mabel was Lars's sister-in-law, and Lars had made his position clear. Cole went to the store 3 times in 2 weeks. The first time, Mabel sold him rice and beans with a face like stone. The second time, she told him the credit was no good anymore, that he would have to pay cash. The third time, she told him she was out of everything he needed. He stood in the store with his hands in his pockets, looking at the shelves. They were not empty. There was rice on the bottom shelf, beans next to it, coffee on the top where he could see the label clearly. He looked at Mabel, and Mabel looked at the floor, and Cole understood that there was nothing left to say. He walked home through the slush, his boots wet through, his coat thin against the wind that came off the river. The cabin was cold when he got there. He had let the fire die out that morning, had not had the strength to split more wood, and now he stood in the dark kitchen and tried to remember the last time he had eaten a full meal. 2 days ago, maybe 3. He sat down in his chair. The stove was cold, the window was still broken, and the blanket he had hung over was not doing much to keep the wind out. He looked at his hands, at the scars, at the missing fingers, and he thought about his rifle in the corner. He thought about the traps he had dumped at the base of the old spruce. He thought about the wolf, out there in the darkness somewhere, hunting for its own food, finding its own warmth. His father's voice came to him then, clear as if the old man was standing in the room. A man provides. A man does what needs to be done. You think the wolf worries about right and wrong? The wolf eats what it kills, and that's the end of it. That's nature. That's the way it's always been. Cole sat in the dark and listened to the voice. It was a good voice, a strong voice, the voice that had raised him and taught him and made him into the man he had been for 67 years. The voice that had put a rifle in his hands when he was 12 years old and told him to shoot the dog that had been bitten by a wolf, because mercy was quick and clean and anything else was cruelty. He stood up. He walked to the corner where the rifle stood, and he picked it up with both hands, cradling it against his chest the way he had cradled the frozen meat in the cave. The wood was cold against his scars. The metal was cold against his cheek. He held the rifle for a long time, and he thought about the wolf, and he thought about his father, and he thought about the yellow eyes watching him across the fire. He put the rifle back in the corner. He did not know why. There was no reason to leave it there. The wolf was not his responsibility. The wolf was a wild animal, a predator, a thing that would kill his dogs and take his food and never once think about mercy. His father had taught him that. His father had taught him everything. But his father had never fallen through the ice. His father had never opened his eyes in a cave and found a wolf's fur spread over his chest. His father had never looked into yellow eyes and seen something looking back that was not fear and not hatred and not anything his father had named for. Cole sat back down. The cold settled into him, deep and slow, and he did not get up to light the fire. He sat in the dark and waited, and after a while he saw the shape at the edge of the forest, gray against the snow, watching him through the broken window. He raised his hand, the scarred stump where his fingers used to be, and he held it against the glass. The wolf did not move. It lay there with its head on its paws, its yellow eyes fixed on the cabin, and Cole sat in the dark and watched it watch him. And for a long time, neither of them moved at all. The sound came after midnight. Cole had drifted into a half-sleep, the kind that came when the cold was too deep for real rest. And at first he thought he had dreamed it. Voices, footsteps, the crunch of boots on frozen snow. He opened his eyes, and the wolf was gone from the tree-line, and the voices were real, and they were close. He stood up slow, his joints screaming, his hands pressed against the wall to steady himself. The window was dark, the blanket blocking his view, but he could hear them clearly now. 3 voices, maybe 4. Men's voices, low and angry, and Lars's voice was the loudest of them all. "He's in there," Lars was saying. "I saw him an hour ago, sitting in the dark like a damn ghost. And the wolf was there too, right at the edge of the trees. He's feeding it. He's keeping it. And we're supposed to just let it happen." Cole stood in the dark kitchen, his heart beating slow and heavy in his chest. He looked at the rifle in the corner, and he looked at the door, and he thought about the rock that had come through his window and the shelves full of food that Mabel would not sell him, and the gray shape that had been watching him every evening for 3 weeks. The voices were closer now. He could hear the snow crunching under their boots, the scrape of something metal against the side of the cabin. He did not move. He stood in the dark with his hands at his sides and waited. And then, from somewhere out in the darkness beyond the cabin, a sound came. Low and long and deep, a sound that went through the walls and through the windows and through Cole's chest like a hand closing around his heart. The wolf was howling. The voices stopped. The footsteps stopped. For a long moment, there was nothing but the howl, rising and falling in the darkness, and then Cole heard something else. Boots on snow, moving fast now, moving away. A door slamming, an engine starting. The howl faded into the night, and Cole stood in his dark cabin with his hands pressed against the cold wall, and he did not know if he was hearing the sound or feeling it or something else entirely. But he knew, in that moment, that the wolf was still there. The wolf was still watching, and for the first time in 3 weeks, Cole let himself breathe. The wolf stayed closer after that night. Cole began to see it in the mornings now, not just at dusk, a gray shape moving through the trees at the edge of his property. It did not come to the cabin. It did not approach him, but it was there, and Cole found himself watching for it, found his eyes drawn to the tree lean the way they had once been drawn to his trap lines. He started leaving food out. Not much, he had barely enough for himself, and his hands made hunting impossible. But scraps from the few meals he could manage, bones from the rabbit he had snared near the river, fish heads from the one good catch he had made before the ice wet out completely. He left them on a flat rock at the edge of the forest, and in the morning they were always gone. The food from Hannah ran out after the second week. Cole did not ask for more. He had taken the bread and the dried fish she had brought, and he was grateful. But he knew what it cost her to come to his door. He had seen the way Lars looked at her, the way the other men talked when she walked past. She had her own life to live, her own place in the village to protect. Cole was not worth losing that. He learned to live on less. His body had always been lean, hard from 50 years of walking trap lines, but the weight was coming off him now in ways that worried him. His belt was 2 notches tighter. His arms, always thin, looked like sticks when he pulled off his shirt to wash. He could see his ribs when he looked in the cracked mirror above the sink, and the scars on his hands were the pinkest things on his body, bright against the gray of his skin. The wolf did not seem to be struggling. Cole watched it move through the trees, watched the way it tested the snow for weak spots, the way it conserved its energy, the way it knew exactly where to find the rabbits and the voles that had not yet emerged from their winter burrows. It was teaching him. That was the thought that came to Cole one morning, watching the wolf pause at the edge of the thicket, its nose lifted to the wind. It was teaching him how to survive. He started following it. Not close, he could not move fast enough to keep up, and his hands made the trek dangerous. But from a distance, watching the paths it took, the places it stopped, the way it read the forest the way Cole had once read his trap lines. He learned that the south slope of the ridge held the first berries, even before the snow was fully gone. He learned that the creek below the beaver dam stayed open a month longer than the rest of the river, and the fish gathered there when they could not go anywhere else. He learned that the old burn from 20 years ago was full of rabbits now, the new growth thick and green, and the wolf went there every 3rd day without fail. He followed the wolf for 2 weeks. He did not speak to it, did not approach it, did not do anything that might break the strange understanding that had grown between them. But he watched and he learned, and when he went to the south slope with a bag made from an old shirt, he came back with enough berries to last a week. When he went to the creek with a line he had rigged to work with his ruined hands, he came back with 3 grayling, their scales bright in the afternoon light. When he went to the old burn with a snare he had learned to set with his teeth and the heels of his hands, he came back with a rabbit, its fur still warm. The village noticed. Cole knew they noticed, because the looks changed, the whispers shifted. He was not just crazy anymore. He was something else now, something that did not fit into the way they understood the world. A man who had dumped his traps, who let his hands rot, who walked into the forest without a rifle and came back with food. A man who had been seen following a wolf along the ridge, keeping pace with it, moving when it moved and stopping when it stopped. Lars came to the cabin on a Thursday afternoon. Cole was on his porch, splitting wood with an axe he had learned to grip between his forearms, the motion clumsy but effective. He had a pile of kindling at his feet, and the sun was warm on his face. And for a moment he had forgotten about the village, about the store, about everything except the rhythm of the work. Lars did not come alone. There were 3 men with him, men Cole had known his whole life, men whose fathers had trapped alongside his father. They stood at the edge of the yard, and Lars had a rifle in his hand, and Cole stopped splitting wood and watched them. "We're going to kill it," Lars said. Cole did not ask what he meant. He knew. He had known this was coming, had been waiting for it since the night the wolf howled outside his window. He set the axe down, slow and careful, and he looked at Lars with a face that did not show anything at all. "You can't keep it," Lars said. "You think we don't see you? Following it into the woods, leaving food for it, acting like it's some kind of pet. It's a wolf. It's a killer, and you're bringing it right to our doors." Cole looked past Lars at the men behind him. He knew their faces. Carl, who had taught him how to skin a beaver when he was 14. Henry, who had helped him build this cabin 30 years ago. David, who was Lars's cousin and had never liked Cole anyway. They looked at him with something that was not quite anger and not quite fear, something in between that Cole did not have a name for. "It's not a pet," Cole said. His voice was quiet, rough from disuse. "It's a teacher." Lars left. It was not a nice sound. A teacher. You've lost it. You've really lost it. That wolf broke you, Cole. It got in your head and it broke you. And now you're out here talking about teachers and leaving meat in the woods like some kind of witch. And we're supposed to just let it happen. Cole looked at the rifle in Lars's hands. It was a good rifle, a Winchester, the same model Cole had in his cabin. He thought about the rifle in the corner, the one he had picked up and put down on the night the men came to his door. He thought about his father's voice, telling him what a man does, what a man provides. "You're not going to kill it," Cole said. Lars stopped laughing. His face went hard, the way it had in the store, the way it had on the night the rock came through the window. "You think you can stop us?" Cole did not answer. He walked past Lars, past the men, past the edge of the yard, and he did not look back. He walked toward the forest, toward the ridge, toward the places the wolf had taught him. Behind him, he heard voices, footsteps, the click of something metal that might have been a safety or might have been his imagination. He walked faster. His hands were useless, his legs were weak, his chest was tight with the effort of moving through the softening snow. But he walked, and he did not stop, and when he reached the edge of the forest, he did not look back to see if they were following. The wolf was waiting for him at the ridge. It stood at the base of the old spruce, the one where Cole had dumped his traps, and it looked at him with those yellow eyes, and Cole stopped in front of it and did not know what to say. He had no words for this. He had no words for any of it. The wolf turned. It started up the ridge, moving slow, its legs still twisted, its gait still uneven, and Cole followed. He followed it up the ridge and over the top, into the deep forest where the village could not see, where Lars and his men would not go because they were afraid of the dark and the silence and the things that live there. They walked for an hour, 2 hours. Cole did not know how long. His legs were shaking, his lungs were burning, and the wolf stayed ahead of him, never rushing, never looking back, always there when Cole thought he could not take another step. And then they were on the ridge above the village, looking down at the cabins and the store and the smoke rising from chimneys, and the wolf sat down in the snow and looked at Cole. Cole sat down beside it. His hands were in his lap, the scars white against the dark of his coat, and he could hear the shouts from below, the men calling to each other, searching for something they could not find. The wolf did not move. It sat there with its head up, its ears forward, watching the village with something that was not fear and not hatred and not anything Cole had words for. He looked at the wolf. He looked at the village. He looked at his hands, the ruined hands that could not hold a rifle, could not set a trap, could not do any of the things a man was supposed to do. And he understood, for the first time, that he was not a man who had lost his hands. He was a man who had found something else, something he did not have a name for, something that did not need fingers to hold it. The wolf turned its head. It looked at him, and Cole looked back, and in the wolf's eyes he saw the forest and the river and the cave where he had almost died. He saw the night they had spent together, the fire burning low, the trust that had grown between them without words. He saw a future that did not include traps or pelts or the store of Paxson Bay. He reached out with his ruined hand, the scarred stump where his fingers used to be, and he touched the wolf's fur. The wolf did not move away. It sat there in the snow, and Cole sat beside it, and together they watched the sun go down on the village that had been Cole's home for 67 years. The shouts faded. The lights came on, one by one, and then went out again. The wolf stood, shook the snow from its fur, and looked back at Cole one more time before it disappeared into the darkness. Cole sat on the ridge until the stars came out. Then he stood, slow and careful, and he walked back down the hill toward his cabin. He did not know what tomorrow would bring. He did not know if Lars would come back, if the village would find a way to force him out, if he would survive the spring with his ruined hands and his empty cupboards. But he knew, for the first time in his life, that he was not alone. And that was enough. The days grew longer. Cole had almost stopped thinking about the village. His life had shrunk to the cabin, the forest, the ridge, and the gray shape that moved through the trees ahead of him. He woke with the sun now, something he had never done as a trapper, and he spent his mornings on the porch, watching the light come up over the river, feeling the warmth on his face. His hands were healing into something functional, the scars tight and pink, the stumps of his fingers calloused from the work he had learned to do with them. He could grip an axe handle now, could hold a fishing line, could light the stove with a match and not drop it. The wolf came every day. Sometimes it stayed at the edge of the forest, watching. Sometimes it disappeared for hours and came back with blood on its muzzle, its belly full. Once, it brought him a hare, dropping it at the edge of the yard and retreating to the tree-line. And Cole had stood there looking at the offering for a long time before he understood what it meant. He had cooked the hare that night, shared the meat with no one, and felt something in his chest that he had not felt in years. He did not see Lars. He heard things, of course. The village was small, and sound carried across the water, and Cole had always had good ears. He heard the trucks starting in the morning, the chainsaws in the afternoon, the voices raised in anger or laughter, depending on the day. But he did not see Lars, and Lars did not come to his cabin. And Cole let himself believe that maybe, somehow, it was over. The trap was set on the path to the ridge. Cole found on a morning when the fog was thick off the river, the world reduced to gray shapes and muffled sounds. He had been following the wolf's tracks from the night before, the prints clear in the frost, and he was not watching the ground the way he used to. He had forgotten. He had let himself forget that there were other men in the world, men who set traps, men who knew where he walked. The trap was a number 4 Victor, old steel, the jaws wide enough for a wolf's leg. Cole knew at the moment he saw it, knew the shape of it, the weight of it, the way the pan was set just above the ground so the snow would not give it away. He had used traps like this for 40 years. He had set them in the same places, the same paths, the same game trails. He knew what they could do. He knew what they had done. He stopped walking. His heart was beating hard in his chest, and his hands were shaking, and for a moment he could not move at all. He stood on the path with the fog closing in around him and stared at the trap, at the jaws that could snap a wolf's leg clean through, at the chain that would hold it in place until the trapper came to finish the job. It was Lars. It had to be Lars. No one else in the village would set a trap this size, in this place, on a path that only Cole and the wolf used. It was a message. It was a warning. And it was more than that. It was a promise. Cole knelt in the snow. His hands were clumsy, the scars tight, the missing fingers making everything harder than it should have been. But he knew this trap. He knew how to open it, how to disarm it, how to make it safe. He had done it 1,000 times. He put his weight on the spring, felt the steel give, and he was reaching for the safety catch when he heard the sound behind him. The wolf was there. It stood at the edge of the fog, 15 feet away, and it was looking not at Cole, but at the trap, at the steel jaws that had almost closed on its leg again. Its ears were flat against its skull. Its hackles were up, and its leg, the twisted leg, the leg Cole had broken 6 years ago, was lifted off the ground as if it already felt the pain. "Easy," Cole said. His voice was low, steady, the voice he used when he was working with something that could hurt him. "Easy now. I've got it." The wolf did not move. It stood there in the fog, its yellow eyes fixed on the trap, and Cole could see the tension in its body, the readiness to flee or fight or whatever it needed to do to survive. He had put that fear there. He had put it there 6 years ago, and he had put it there again in this moment by leading the wolf onto a path where a trap was waiting. He disarmed the trap. It took longer than it should have, his hands shaking, his breath coming in short gasps, but he did it. The safety catch slid into place. The jaws locked open. The trap was dead. Cole sat back in the snow. His hands were bleeding. He had cut them on something, a burr on the chain, a rough edge of the steel, and the blood was bright against the scars. He looked at his hands, and he looked at the trap, and he looked at the wolf, and he did not know what to say. The wolf lowered its head. It took a step forward, then another, and Cole held his breath and did not move. The wolf came to the trap. It sniffed at the jaws, at the chain, at the places where Cole's blood had fallen on the steel. Its nose was inches from Cole's hands, and Cole could feel its breath on his skin, warm in the cold air. Then it lifted its head. It looked at Cole, and Cole looked back, and in the wolf's eyes he saw something that was not fear and not anger and not anything he had a name for. It was something older than that, something that had been in the forest long before Cole was born and would be there long after he was gone. The wolf turned and walked into the fog. Cole watched it go, watched the gray shape dissolve into the gray light, and he did not call out. He did not follow. He sat in the snow with the dead trap beside him and the blood drying on his hands, and he let the wolf go. He took the trap with him when he went back to the cabin. He carried it by the chain, swinging at his side, and when he reached the yard, he did not go inside. He walked to the edge of the village, to the place where the cabins began, and he set the trap in the middle of the road. He set it where everyone would see it, where Lars would see it. He went back to his cabin and sat on the porch and waited. He waited all day. He waited through the afternoon and into the evening, and when the sun went down and the lights came on in the village, he was still sitting there, watching the road, waiting for Lars to come. Lars did not come, but Cole knew he would. Lars would come, and when he came, Cole would be there. He would be sitting on his porch with his ruined hands in his lap, and the wolf somewhere in the forest behind him, and he would not move. He would not fight. He would not do any of the things the old Cole would have done. He would just be there, and that would be enough. The moon came up over the river, full and white, and Cole sat in the light of it and thought about the wolf. He thought about the cave, about the fire, about the fur spread over his chest. He thought about the night he had almost used the rifle, the night he had put it back in the corner instead. He thought about the trap in the road, the message he had sent, the war he had started. He did not know if he had done the right thing. He did not know if there was a right thing anymore. But he knew, sitting on his porch in the moonlight, that he was not the same man who had fallen through the ice. That man had been afraid of dying. This man was afraid of something else, something worse. This man was afraid of what he might become if he did not stand here, on this porch, in this light, and wait. Lars came in the morning. Cole was on the porch when he heard the truck, the engine loud in the still air, and he watched it come down the road from the village, a dust of gravel rising behind it. The truck stopped at the edge of his yard, and Lars got out, and behind him were Carl and Henry, and two other men Cole did not recognize. They had rifles. All of them had rifles. Cole did not stand. He sat in his chair on the porch, his hands in his lap, and he watched them come. The trap was still in the road where he had left it, a dark shape against the gravel, and Lars stepped over it without looking down. "You should have stayed in the woods," Lars said. He was standing in the yard now, 10 feet from the porch, his rifle across his chest. His face was red, the way it got when he had been drinking, but his eyes were clear and hard. "You should have stayed up there with your wolf and let the rest of us live our lives." Cole looked past Lars at the men behind him. Carl would not meet his eyes. Henry was looking at the ground. The other two were watching Cole with something that looked like fear, and Cole understood that they were afraid of him. Not of what he could do, but of what he had become. A man who had given up everything. A man who had nothing left to lose. "The trap was yours," Cole said. It was not a question. Lars did not answer. He took a step closer, and Cole saw the rifle shift in his hands, saw the way his finger rested against the trigger guard. That wolf has been seen at the edge of the village. It's been seen near the school. People are afraid to let their kids outside, and you sit here on your porch and tell yourself you're doing something good. Cole shook his head. It doesn't go near the school. It stays on the ridge. It stays away from people. It stays near you. Lars's voice was loud now, almost a shout. It stays near you, and you stay near us, and that means it stays near us. You brought it here. You brought it to our homes, to our families, and now you're going to fix it. Cole understood then. He understood what Lars wanted, what he had wanted from the beginning. Not to kill the wolf himself, to make Cole do it, to make Cole prove that he was still one of them, still a man, still a trapper who understood that some things had to be killed. "No," Cole said. Lars's face changed. The anger was still there, but something else had joined it, something colder. "You don't get to say no. You don't get to walk away from what you are. You think that wolf loves you? You think it cares about you? It's an animal. It's a killer. And tomorrow, if it gets hungry enough, it'll kill you too. Same as it would kill any of us." Cole looked at his hands. The scars were white in the morning light, the stumps of his fingers smooth and pink. He thought about the wolf's fur under his hand, the warmth of it, the way the wolf had sat beside him on the ridge and watched the sun go down. "It already saved my life," Cole said. "It pulled me from the river. It kept me warm. It brought me food when I couldn't hunt. And I crippled it. 6 years ago, I put a trap on its leg, and I walked away, and I let it suffer, and it still saved my life." He stood up. His legs were shaking, but he stood, and he looked at Lars, and he did not look away. "You want to kill it," Cole said. "You want to kill it because it's different, because it doesn't fit, because it walked into your world and showed you something you don't understand. And you want to kill it because you're afraid. Not of the wolf, of me, of what I did, of what it means." Lars raised the rifle. It was a fast movement, a practiced movement, the kind of movement Cole had seen 100 times in the woods when a man was lining up a shot. The barrel was pointed at Cole's chest, and Lars's finger was on the trigger, and Cole stood on his porch with his hands at his sides and did not move. "You're going to die for that wolf," Lars said. His voice was shaking now, the anger cracking open to show something underneath. "You're going to die for an animal, for a thing that would eat you if it was hungry enough. That's what you want." Cole did not answer. He looked past the rifle, past Lars, past the men standing in the yard. He looked at the ridge, at the trees, at the place where the wolf had been watching every morning for weeks. The ridge was empty. The wolf was somewhere else, somewhere safe, somewhere Lars could not find it. Yes, Cole said. The sound came from behind him. A low growl, deep and rumbling, the kind of sound that went through a man's chest and settled in his bones. Cole turned, and the wolf was there, standing at the corner of the cabin, its hackles raised, its teeth bared. It had come from a forest. It had come from wherever it had been hiding, and it had come to him, and now it stood between Cole and the men with the rifles. Lars swung the rifle toward the wolf. Cole saw it happen, saw the barrel move, saw Lars's finger tighten on the trigger, and he did not think. He stepped off the porch, stepped in front of the wolf, and the bullet hit him in the shoulder before he heard the sound. The force of it spun him around. He felt his legs go out from under him, felt the porch swing hit his back, felt the blood hot on his chest. He was on the ground, looking up at the sky, and the pain had not come yet, not the real pain, just a numbness that spread from his shoulder down his arm and into his chest. He heard shouting. He heard boots on gravel, doors slamming, an engine starting. He heard Lars's voice, high and frantic, saying something he could not understand. And then he heard nothing at all except the sound of his own breath, loud in his ears, and the sound of something moving beside him in the snow. The wolf was there. It was lying beside him, its head on his chest, its yellow eyes inches from his face. He could feel its warmth through his coat, feel its breath on his skin, and he raised his ruined hand and touched the gray fur. "Go," he whispered. His voice was a thin thing, barely there. "Go. They'll come back." The wolf did not move. It lay beside him in the snow, and Cole looked into its eyes, and he saw the cave, the fire, the night they had spent together. He saw the ridge, the moon, the way the wolf had sat beside him and watched the village. He saw everything, and then he saw nothing at all. The first thing was the pain. It came from his shoulder, deep and hot, spreading down his arm and across his chest like fire moving through dry grass. Cole opened his eyes and saw the ceiling of his cabin, the familiar cracks in the logs, the old lantern hanging from the beam. He was in his bed. Someone had put him in his bed. He tried to move, and the pain stopped him. His arm was strapped to his chest, wrapped in bandages that were white except for a red stain spreading from his shoulder. His hands were there too, the ruined hands lying on the blanket like things that belonged to someone else. He looked at them for a long time, trying to remember how he had gotten here, trying to remember anything after the sound of the rifle. The door opened. Hannah came in with a basin of water, her face pale, her hands shaking. She stopped when she saw him watching her, and for a moment neither of them spoke. "You're awake," she said. It was not a question. Cole tried to speak. His throat was dry, his lips cracked, and the sound that came out was barely a whisper. The wolf. Hannah set the basin down on the table. She would not look at him. She busied herself with the bandages, with the water, with anything that was not his face. "It's gone. After the shot, after you fell, it stayed with you." Lars was going to shoot it again, but Carl stopped him. Carl said the wolf wasn't moving, wasn't growling, was just lying there with its head on your chest. And then the others started yelling at Lars, and Lars got in his truck and drove away, and the wolf stayed until we carried you inside. That went back to the forest. Cole closed his eyes. The pain was worse now, or maybe it was the same, and he was only now letting himself feel it. He thought about the wolf's head on his chest, the yellow eyes inches from his face, the warmth of its fur against his skin. He thought about the way it had come to him, had come out of the forest when it should have run, had put itself between him and the rifles without hesitation. "Lars?" he asked. Hannah's hands stopped moving. She stood by the bed, her back to him, and when she spoke her voice was tight. "Lars is gone. He left that night, drove out with the men who came with him. No one knows where. Some people think he went to Fairbanks. Some people think he'll come back. I don't know. She turned then, and Cole saw that she had been crying. Her eyes were red, her face blotched, and she looked at him with something that was not pity and not fear, but something in between. The doctor came again. He said the bullet went through clean. You lost a lot of blood, but you'll keep the arm. He left more antibiotics, more bandages. He said you should go to Anchorage, but I told him you wouldn't. Cole smiled. It was a small thing, barely a movement of his lips, but it was there. You were right. The weeks that followed were slow. Hannah came every day, and sometimes other people came too. Carl came on a Tuesday, stood in the doorway of the cabin with his hat in his hands, and told Cole that he was sorry. He did not say what he was sorry for, and Cole did not ask. Henry came with a box of food, canned goods, and dried meat, and he set it on the table and left without saying anything at all. Even Mabel came from the store with a bag of coffee and a loaf of bread, and she stood in the kitchen and cried and told Cole that she had not known what else to do, that Lars had been her brother-in-law, that she had been afraid. Cole listened to all of them. He did not judge them. He did not forgive them. Not yet, but he listened, and that seemed to be enough. The wolf did not come. Cole watched for it from his porch, the way he had before, but the ridge was empty, the tree leaned silent. He told himself that it was better this way. The wolf had its own life, its own pack, its own world. It did not need an old man with ruined hands sitting on a porch, waiting for it to appear. But he waited anyway. He waited through the last of the snow, through the first green shoots pushing up through the mud, through the days when the river broke apart and the ice went out with a sound like thunder. His arm healed. The scar was thick and red, pulling at his shoulder when he moved, but the arm worked. He could lift things now, could carry wood, could do the work that needed to be done. His hands were the same, the fingers gone, the stumps calloused, but he had learned to live with them. He had learned to live with a lot of things. Spring came to Paxson Bay. The village woke up the way it did every year, the windows opening, the children running in the streets, the boats going out on the river. Cole did not go to the village. He did not need to. He had his cabin, his garden, his snares. He had the things the wolf had taught him. He had everything he needed. He was on the porch one evening, the sun low on the river, the air warm for the first time in months, when he saw the gray shape on the ridge. His heart stopped. He sat forward in his chair, his eyes fixed on the ridge, and he watched the shape move down the slope, slow and careful, its gait uneven, its leg still twisted. The wolf came to the edge of the yard. It stopped there at the place where the grass met the forest, and it looked at Cole with its yellow eyes. Cole stood up. His legs were shaking, his hand was shaking, and he walked across the yard toward the wolf, slow and careful, the way he had learned to walk in the months since the ice broke. He stopped 3 feet away. The wolf did not move. It stood there in the evening light, its fur gray against the green of the forest, and Cole looked at it and saw everything. The cave, the fire, the fur on his chest, the meat left on the stone, the ridge, the moon, the bullet in his shoulder. He saw it all, and he did not have words for any of it. Behind the wolf, something moved. Cole looked, and he saw them. 3 small shapes, gray and brown, tumbling in the grass at the edge of the forest. Pups. The wolf had pups. They were clumsy, unsteady, their ears too big for their heads, their legs too long for their bodies. They rolled over each other, nipped at each other's ears, chased the moths that rose from the grass. The wolf looked back at them, then looked at Cole. It lowered its head just slightly, and then it turned and walked back toward the pups, and Cole stood in the yard and watched them go. He did not call out. He did not follow. He stood in the grass with the sun on his face and the river moving behind him, and he watched the wolf lead its pups up the ridge, into the forest, into the place where they would grow and hunt and live the way wolves had always lived. The wolf stopped once at the top of the ridge and looked back at him. Cole raised his hand, the scarred stump where his fingers used to be, and he held it up against the light. The wolf disappeared into the trees. Cole stood on the ridge for a long time after it was gone. The sun went down. The lights came on in the village, one by one, and went out again. The stars came out, and the moon rose, and Cole stood in the grass with the night wind on his face, and he did not move. He thought about his father. He thought about the traps, the pelts, the years of killing. He thought about the cave, the fire, the yellow eyes that had watched him in the darkness. He thought about the bullet in his shoulder, the scar on his chest, the hands that could not hold a rifle anymore. He thought about the pups tumbling in the grass, and he smiled. He walked back to his cabin. The door was open, the lantern lit, the bed made. He sat down on the porch, in the chair he had sat in for 1,000 nights, and he looked out at the river, at the ridge, at the dark line of the forest against the stars. The wolf was out there somewhere. The wolf was out there with its pups, and it was alive, and Cole was alive, and the world was still turning. He did not know what came next. He did not know if the village would accept him, if Lars would come back, if the wolf would ever come down from the ridge again. He did not know any of these things, and for the first time in his life, he did not need to know. He sat on his porch in the darkness, and he listened to the river, and he waited for the morning.